Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight's discussion is going to focus on regional politics in the region, looking at relations between Rwanda and her neighbors, specifically Uganda, as well as the Democratic Republic of Congo. In particular, we're going to look at recent developments between Rwanda and Uganda regarding the Rwanda MOU, as well as claims of balkanization by DRC opposition parties. And with us today, we have guests, subject matter experts on this, and I'm going to start with our guest, second time on the show. On my left, Vincent Gasana, media practitioner. Welcome to The Square.
Thank you.
Great to have you again.
Yes, thank you.
Great. We also have with us Tom Dahiro, who is a scholar and political commentator weighing in on this topic for tonight. Tom, great to have you on The Square.
Thanks very much, Dan.
As always, The Square is joined by its resident panelists. Charles Haber, resident panelist. Great to have you on the show.
Same here, Diana. Happy New Year, Vincent. Happy New Year.
Yes, very happy New Year to everyone.
To everyone. We're also usually joined by Brenda Namata. She's not here, but she'll be joining us from wherever she is, tuning in, from wherever she is. My name is Dan PC, host of The Square, and before we begin, Charles, as always, between the resident panelists, we're going to see if we have anything midweek highlight that we'd like to discuss. Is there anything you want to share?
Approximately 7 months ago, I joked about the drastic evolution of Rwandan zebra crossings. 7 months ago, I can, at the risk of using a hyperbole, say that the zebra crossings have changed 7 times.
7?
Again, well, I'm sounding hyperbolic.
Okay, but a lot of times.
Yes, and I'm sure they are not yet done.
Yes.
I suspect they are not yet done because I saw a tweet from the Ministry of Infrastructure to the effect that we should expect another color. Meanwhile, as all this is happening, there are places you get to and you have to stop because there is no color, yet there is a blockage. So I pain when
it's a no color crossing.
I pain when taxpayers' money is put to such waste.
I know
extremely painful.
You've raised this a couple of times before. Okay, well, we're going to kick.
But I have a second one. I need to apologize to the viewers that I'm not wearing Made in Rwanda today. I was running extremely late from the Eastern Province, and I didn't have enough time to change. Yes.
It's okay, as long as we're always promoting Made in Rwanda on the show. Before we kick off, we just want to read a couple of tweets from people who are tuned into the show. And the first tweet we have is from Anaclet. And Anaclet states that during a press conference on December 23rd last year in Kinshasa, one of DRC officials proposed that DRC might need to start a war with Rwanda. Now tell me, can this balkanization talk make this war possible? These are some of the questions that we're going to answer, and we decided to start by reading your tweets. The second tweet is from Frank Chigenza, who says that, I dare say the silent majority is praying for a peaceful and quick resolution to the Uganda-Rwanda impasse. There is too much at stake. We also have another tweet on the topic tonight, which is regional politics, Rwanda, Uganda, and DRC relations. And this tweet is again from Frank, who states that ahead of the show, this is what he wants us to discuss. If it will be solved, 3 problems, actually. If it will be solved, when it will be solved, and whether it will be completely rooted out. And the last tweet, also again on this topic, is from Meneka Linda, who states that those who launched it need to close it down. All of it. Release illegally detained Rwandans, no Ugandan in a similar situation in Rwanda, and stop illegally detaining new ones. Stop sponsoring armed terror and genocidal groups against the other. Only Uganda is doing so. So these are some of the things that we are going to discuss tonight. And the first question, I'll address it to Vincent and Tom, is to do with the recent release from Uganda of illegally detained Rwandans. These were 9 of them that were released, and the new year started with the release of Uganda. The year started, with 9 Rwandans who were released from Uganda. Some were held for as long as 3 years, illegally detained for as long as 3 years. And I want to just open this to the panel, and starting with you, Vincent. To start with, what do you think influenced this decision? Because we know that talks hit a deadlock in December last year between Rwanda and Uganda on these relations. And the new year 2020 began with the release of these 9 Rwandans.
I don't know. I mean, who knows what's going on in Uganda? But I would imagine you had the special envoy, I think, in Ambassador Yebale to go and see President Kagame. And by all accounts, he's a very serious man, so they must have had a good enough exchange for him to take back. I mean, I imagine what must have been going on there, because if he's that serious, I'm sure you imagine that he'll have been saying to President Kagame, look, I know it's all happening, but, you know, what can you do? So let's see what we can try and resolve here. So he goes back with something, and President Museveni responds with some very nice sounding tweets. And then we have
those
these
are very
releases.
positive tweets, actually, between both Presidents Kagame and Museveni during as the New Year clocked in.
So something very serious went on that enabled Uganda to try and do that. We don't know. We can't speculate what it was. I think that, I mean, I would imagine that, and also the fact that the Rwandan delegation, under the leadership of Ambassador Olivier Nduhungirehe, who is a state minister for East Africa for Rwanda, I think they got to a stage where they decided they didn't want to play any more games. I think when they went there and presented all this evidence to the Ugandans, and the Ugandans continued the denial game, and the Rwandans decided, well, let's take it back to the heads of state. Maybe the Ugandans thought, well, look, we pushed this as far as it can go, so maybe we ought to change something. And on top of which, I think the closure, non-closure of borders of heavy goods is probably hurting them a lot more than they thought it would. And they thought, maybe it's time to change something. And this, hopefully, is a precursor to something a little bit more serious, and they intend to end all of this.
Tom, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, the release of 9 people out of hundreds, for me, that, well, is something, but not much. Again, the stories we heard from these guys who were brought back are so painful that we actually don't know what's happening to others who remained there. If you have our compatriots who went crazy because of conditions they were subjected to.
And you're talking about torture?
Yes, obviously. And from the stories we got from these 9 guys is that they are very much aware of fellow Rwandans who are now in psychiatric hospitals simply because of the conditions they were held. Another thing is we have to even to question, is it illegal detention or people taken hostage? Illegal detention is a little bit something illegal. You can extend the number of hours when you are supposed, from the time of arrest to being taken to court. It's not 48 hours, has gone for a week. But when people are snatched from the streets, from the homes, from bars, from churches, and then taken by civilians, bundle them in numberless unregistered or minibuses with fake numbers, just cover them with hoods or blindfold them, keep them in the dark for a long time, under torture for 1.5 years, 2 years, and then that's not even, you can't call it
illegal detention.
It's not really illegal detention.
Kidnapping.
It's kidnapping and holding people hostage. It's hostage taking. And then especially this applies when they are released, and then the foreign minister says we expect Rwanda to reciprocate. It's as if someone who has taken a hostage is demanding for a ransom, which is very unfortunate. And from the time these people were released, now I understand the problem is even much bigger. Rwandans have all reasons to fear going to Uganda. And we also need a definition of goodwill. A word goodwill has to be redefined as far as the politics of Uganda towards Rwanda are concerned. Yeah.
And Charlie, before you weigh in, I wanted to also ask, from the Ugandan side, the allegations that, the constant chime that most Ugandan officials or people who talk to the media say that the reason for these arbitrary arrests or abductions, as we're calling them on this show right now, is because that these people are spies sent to Uganda to, conduct espionage and so forth and so on. And what do you say? What do you have to say to that?
Well,
Charles, I'd like you to weigh in on this after, if you will. But Tom, what would you like to say to that response very quickly?
If a foreigner or a national does something which is against the law, you expect the due process of law to be taken. If someone is accused of being a spy, is not a subject of kidnap, or being tortured, and then for one or 2.5 years, and then you just release that person, just go. We are talking about human beings. We are not talking about objects. And that's why you find maybe the media is a little bit off the mark. When we talk about the people who are illegally detained or who are being taken hostage and abandoned, disappeared, we don't know how many were killed. And then you talk about the closing of the border. The level of insensitivity is just too much. I just find it quite offensive when we are talking about hundreds of people who are being held in horrible conditions. These are Rwandans. Their embassy, our High Commission is not informed about them, which, according to the international law, is supposed to be done. And all of a sudden say, oh, I have some 9 guys here, you just come and sign, I have received them, take them across the border. We are not talking about a lady whose baby was snatched from her. This is not it's not ordinary politics we should be discussing in the second decade of this century.
Charles?
Indeed, the matters are extremely severe, but at the risk of putting a rope around my neck, I will disagree with Tom on only one matter.
Granted.
If the United States of America caught a Mexican spy, not take him to KFC and treat him to a sumptuous luncheon. So spies are not treated with kid gloves.
You wouldn't get sumptuous lunches at KFC anyway.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So on that point,
but very quickly, with KFC coming into Rwanda, that's an interesting
on that point, I think, Bwana Tom, I think that was not the best analogy. No. But that said, let me finish my point, because there's a risk of it not being gotten right. The easiest scapegoat across countries is to call the other person a spy when you're not so sure of how to refer to that person. And in President Kagame's own words, at the risk of, sorry, I can't quote him word for word, but I will say what he referred to. He said, "There is no country that is not interested in their other neighbors' businesses." And he even alluded to the fact who said that Uganda does not have spies in Rwanda. But do we treat them with the same way that? Imagine if the government of Rwanda, and that was my interpretation of what President Kagame said, that imagine if Rwanda tomorrow was going to wake up and arrest each and every suspected entrant or resident in Rwanda that hails from Uganda and label them a spy. Then how shall we be doing this? You know, who is saying that there are no Ugandans who have interest in Rwanda? Of course, we have interests in Tanzania, we have interests in all our neighbors, and it is not unique to us. That is how the game of politics is played. You have to have interest in your neighbors. I need to know what my next door neighbor uses to cook, because if they are using extremely inflammable stuff, it will burn my house. So I hope, Bwana Tom, you've gotten my point. It was only to the extent that the treatment and the interpretation of espionage is purely a scapegoat. Now, Vincent says something that's extremely important in all this game, and to throw a span of wax in this conversation. There is no winner in all this that is happening. And as a business person, I would prefer to take the route of interpreting the release of the 9 people as a sign of goodwill. Now, obviously, the politicians and the diplomats will want to push harder, and rightfully so. And they need to have all the full backing to push harder. Because if the government of Uganda has released 9 of several, it's a step in the right direction, but additionally it says, okay, now we are ready to listen. Our position has changed. In November, they were saying there were none. In January, they have released 9. Should we clap? Definitely not. But should we have hope? In my opinion, yes.
And I'd just like very quickly, because we've discussed this issue on the square several times, Uganda-Rwanda relations. And Charles, I remember the last time you said you had zero optimism. Would you say that you have changed your tune a bit?
Yes. I want to just put things in context of where my optimism came from. And I will repeat this, and I will still insist that that is the case. Will our relations with Uganda ever go back to where they were? I do not think so. That's where my optimism comes from. But will we be able to travel and probably, will we be able to tick certain boxes? I think so. But I don't think we'll ever go back to where we were.
Vincent, is there something you'd like to respond
Well, I
to?
mean, I was actually wondering, where were relations with Uganda? Because we assume, there's an assumption that we've always had perfect relations. Now, the one thing that has come out of all of this, you've had suggestions that the way that Uganda is behaving, and let's be a bit clear on this, we're not picking on Uganda, but it is, objectively speaking, all of this is coming from the Ugandan side. You talked about the idea of spying without suggesting somehow that Rwanda was spying on everybody, left, right, and center. Maybe
good reasons to, don't we?
I don't know. Maybe there are, or maybe there aren't. But if you catch a spy, as I think both of you have alluded to, you take them to the embassy and check them out of the country. You don't put them away for 2-3 years and do all manner of ghastly things to them, and then just check them at the border. And also, I've actually written at least, I think maybe 1 or 2 pieces on this, and I've interviewed some people on this. And certainly the people that I've spoken to don't look like the kind of people that one would call spies. I mean, a lot of them have been laborers going over the border, as people have done since time immemorial, over these borders to go and see Gupagasa, make a bit more money that perhaps they do in their own localities. And the majority of them are those kinds of people. And I was actually thinking, as I was listening to some of them, that if there are any real spies, any real intelligence people, they're unlikely to be caught because they know what they're doing. So what they're rounding up, even if it isn't just an excuse, and I rather think it is an excuse. But even if it weren't just an excuse, they're rounding up completely the wrong people, and I think that whatever their faults might be, the Ugandan intelligence understands better. So they're deliberately doing this, knowing that the people they're rounding up are not what they say they are. They're deliberately doing this so that the people they're rounding up are ordinary people. And usually along the borders with Uganda and Rwanda. So, and I think for me, the hopeful signs are that there is a grown-up in a room, and a grown-up in a room so far has been Rwanda. I mean, let's try and imagine for a moment if Rwanda had acted to any degree reciprocating to what has been done by Uganda, what has been done by Burundi, and in the past, what has been done by others. The region would be in conflagration, or at least close to it. So I think the hopeful signs are that we've got a grown-up in the room, and for as long as we've got a grown-up in a room, there is likelihood that it is going to change.
Tom, you wanted to say something earlier?
Yes. At least Rwanda is not that silly to deploy a baby as a spy. We talked about a baby who was snatched from the mother.
Yes.
This was not a spy. We have several people who were snatched again in the Kisoro district, and from their testimonies, they were subjected to slave labor. And this is not the way you should be treating spies, and no country would treat a spy, a court spy, that way. There is a lady who was working, I think, with the MTN.
Yes.
Who was just deported. And another Belgian, I think, was deported to supposedly spying for Rwanda. But we had no similar cases in Rwanda whereby we are snatching Ugandans, calling them spies. I think there is only one girl who is in detention, whose father is the chairman of RNC in Uganda region. But again, Rwanda have reasons to be spying on Uganda. If someone is harboring the enemies, and they even don't deny they're helping them, they are the sponsors, they just come and go. Some of the information is public more than they don't. One doesn't need to deploy a spy to know so and so is a certain leader has been in Uganda. Even some of them, they say it. I think the other time this Rugema said we work with the same eye. That you don't need to deploy a spy when someone who is working with the government is doing it for you. So, so there must be something different. When we are talking about releasing the nine people, actually before that they had released, I think, a number of. There's a time they released about 13 or 30. Yeah? I don't know the reason why they made this number 9 a game changer or a magic number.
I think it was because it was immediately after the visit of the envoy.
The envoy to. But I think what I'm gathering in all this, at least from a Rwandan perspective, especially in the public sphere, we actually don't have knowledge on valid reasons or any reasons as to why Rwandans are being illegally detained, abducted off the streets of Kampala until this day, for the last 3 years.
We don't.
We keep on asking why, from a high level to just having a conversation like this on the show, and then this is what I'm trying to get to the bottom of.
Yeah.
Like, we actually don't know why this is happening.
Exactly.
It'd be interesting.
We are talking about things which some of them are public, but we don't understand why some things are happening
To this date.
to this date.
This is
So if we accept that the idea of spies is a bit of a red herring, it's not. That is not the issue. Then we need to start looking at why all of a sudden relations have deteriorated. And Charles was saying that will they ever get back to where they were? Then the question to me again is, where were they actually to begin with? I mean, if we go back to, I don't know, if we go back to the NRM, National Resistance Movement days, there weren't really that good relations with Rwanda anyway. So if we talk about what I consider to be modern state of Rwanda and the modern state of Uganda, you had a period of time, say, when there was some kind of good relations, but Rwanda was not in a position to have normal state relations. The RPF was too busy trying to fight mass murderers, and Uganda did whatever it did. So it's only really until after 1994, say 95, 96, 98, that we can begin to talk about what kind of relationship does Uganda have with Rwanda. If we want to know what it is that to which one can get back, then that's where we start. But then we have to analyze what that was.
But it's interesting because but just very quickly, it's interesting because when you look at Rwanda, Ugandan media as well, when it comes to topics on this, they also don't have any valid, concrete reasons.
Ugandan media have given up trying to find out.
Trying to understand. I mean, there's some that say, it's an issue of complex inferiority or superiority complexes, and surely that cannot be.
Maybe it is, but
that
they haven't bothered to ask anybody. So
that cannot be the reason.
We don't know. Ugandan media has simply given up the job of doing what it is it's supposed to do. It is at that stage that I think one needs to differentiate then between media and journalism. Maybe they're doing a lot of media, but they're not doing much journalism. They're doing an awful lot of entertaining, as I see it, but they're not doing any journalism at all.
They're trying to get to the root causes of
you can't have a situation that has been happening between Rwanda and Uganda, and then you have ministers, you have commentators, and you have so on, and you don't actually ask, is the basic question, Rwanda says you're doing this, are you doing it? As simple as that. Do you know, you look around various things in the Ugandan media, nobody's actually asked that. Simply that basic question. Somebody comes in, assuming
maybe there are reasons why they are not asking questions.
Yeah.
Because what is happening right now, what is happening in the dungeons of CMI has ever happened in Uganda before. If you hear the stories of those who come from from captivity, I don't say from detentions, it rings some memories back in Idi Amin's time when we used to read the criminal actions of the State Research Bureau. That snatching, that blindfolding, taking people in car boots, things like that. So it's we are seeing a repetition of same history, maybe same people. Minister Mateke was in those governments, and about the time when the Rwandans were being persecuted. He's still the same who is assisting the FDLR guys. So the question will remain is, why is this happening? And I think the tweet we read from Wenikanda was very valid. When you want to treat a disease, you have to look for a cause. That's why diagnosis is important in medicine.
Charles, you're saying that there's something about pessimistic viewpoint.
No, it's just in reaction to Vincent's comments. You see, let's not ignore the fact that there's a lot at stake, and that's why everyone is talking. That's why the tone of President Kagame has changed ever since Ambassador Ayebare's visit. And that's the exact reason why President Museveni's tone changed as well, exactly after Ambassador Ayebare's visit. It is by design, it's not by mistake that immediately after that visit there was a gesture. And we don't have to agree as we are seated here. And I understand that it's extremely important that we understand the root cause of this. But at the same time, there is a lot of suffering from people from both sides of the border. And it is that suffering that is causing the leaders of the two nations to continue to seek ways of remedying our current standoff. It is not benefiting anyone. And that is where my optimism comes from. Yes.
But maybe you got a false one because
A false sense of optimism?
yes, a false sense of optimism.
My president is usually a very tough talking man.
The interview I ever had on I think on NBS was not quite reassuring. I didn't find anything to make me optimistic, because he did not. I expected as someone who is a special envoy, who is a peacemaker or whatnot. I know Ambassador Ayebare when together, but this time he speaks the same language as.
I mean,
But he has a boss. He has a boss.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
So there was nothing. There was nothing reassuring from what
From
I
his
heard,
end, from
especially
the Ugandan
after
side.
he spoke on television in Uganda.
I mean, let me suggest there is some.
But very quickly, because we
optimism.
need to move to
Absolutely. So there is some
DRC
optimism
topic.
in my pessimistic approach, which is when I said, to what do we get back with these relations? I suppose the inference for me is you can't create a new relationship. And I go back to the fact that the optimism lies in the fact that in spite of huge, really quite grave provocations, Rwanda has remained steady, trying to say, in the words of President Kagame, we're better than this, we can resolve this. And I think that that's where it actually lies. So that there is some hope in thinking about this. And I go along with Tom's idea that the 9 out of 100s is a drop in the ocean, of course, but it is a gesture.
It is a drop.
Yeah, and with gesture politics.
Well, let's move to the second part of this conversation, which is and just earlier before the show started, I was asking this question on claims by the Democratic Republic of the Congo of balkanization. So right now, as you speak, Rwanda and DRC are experiencing, I think, the highest point of flourishing relations in the decade, especially with the advent of President Tshisekedi's administration last year. But amongst all this, improved relations between DRC and Rwanda, there were claims by opposition, former Prime Minister of DRC and opposition member Adolphe Muzito, who said that Rwanda has annexed parts of Eastern Congo and is on a serious path to balkanization of Eastern Congo in terms of, bringing that part of the country and making it part of Rwanda. What do you think, if you could just tell us, and I'll start with you, Tom, what is the genesis of these accusations?
But probably as Tom comes in on this, I for the sake of myself, and on behalf of a few of our viewers, what exactly is balkanization?
Tom, over to you. Over to you. If you can categorically also help us define balkanization, but also what is the genesis? Where do these claims come from, really?
And also tell us why Rwanda has annexed Congo and not told us.
Yes, not told us Rwandans.
Yes.
That we actually have a bigger country as we speak.
Dereliction of duty of informing.
Exactly.
But the question was a half, because there is another one who called for the DRC to annex Rwanda.
True. True.
Huh?
Yes. So it's both sides.
Countries which are called Balkans.
Balkan states. Yeah.
Balkan states.
Yes.
So they became countries one by one in a short time, and then in history they say these are if there is some sort of disintegration and states declaring independence on their own, then say they are balkanizing. But how do you balkanize in Africa? Balkanization happened in Europe.
Already balkanized.
Yeah.
So we can't. Maybe we can Kivulized or Katangalized. Initially in the 60s, Katanga was fighting for secession. And secession tendencies in Congo have existed. But let's come back to what's happening now.
Exactly.
Why now? And who is making those allegations? And what is happening? One, for the last several years, close to I think 20, Rwanda have had armed groups in the DRC fighting this country. There have been changing names, but the one which is famous is in the FDLR, which was created in the 2000s, from other previous groups, RDR, ADIR.
And these are armed groups in DRC aimed at destabilizing Rwanda's security?
Yes.
Yes.
But the Congolese have been suffering more because of these groups. There is a report which is close to 10 years, which was done by some researchers in Goma, who demonstrated how the FDLR had become a state within Congolese state. They had carved out a big chunk of land, and they were the effective leaders of those areas, receiving taxes, even enacting some unwritten laws,
appointing local authorities.
Local authorities.
But if you can,
but none of these politicians who are talking about it right now have mentioned that.
So where is this
happening? Who is mentioning that?
Yes.
The people who have come out with that, bubble allegation, are people who want to delegitimize President Felix Tshisekedi. The Catholic Church, last year, you remember they were at the forefront.
The results, yes. Yeah.
They are the ones
of the elections.
Of the elections.
Yes, yes.
Chenko, you remember the Chenko,
yes.
the acronym Chenko.
Yes.
They are the ones who are saying, no, this one has not won. Fayulu should be the one. Muzito is with Fayulu. Not all members of the opposition are with Muzito and Fayulu in this balkanization bubble. But again, the Catholic Church have been behind racist and discriminatory politics in the DRC, especially in the Kivu province.
Yes.
And a new entrant in this game is the new cardinal. But this politics of wishing FDLR remains has been a part of their thinking and their wish. So for me, the answer comes as to why it has come at this time. It is at the time the FARDC is almost defeating FDLR. They feel their allies in the East are losing, and therefore they will lose control.
Vincent, is that your take on it?
I mean, lots of detail here.
Yes.
I don't have as a deeper grasp of this as Tom has.
Yes.
But actually seems relatively clear, and that means I'm completely idiotic about this. To look at the situation that is that complete, things clear, or I know something that nobody else does, but it's somewhere in between. Look, the idea of balkanization is always existed in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's nothing new. It's actually a colonial dream. They've always wanted to break up that country and hand bits of it to their own placemen like Moise Chombe to then continue to control it.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's been lying dormant for some time, and then time comes when it's needed by somebody for their own ends, and opportunistic, amoral, and sometimes immoral leaders use it to go back and say, well, look, you know, they're trying to break up our country again. And in situations like that, you always need an enemy. And Rwanda happens to serve as a convenient enemy. So if you can get an awful lot of people who too busy trying to survive, trying to find something to eat, and so look, point to an enemy who's going to come and...
A convenient enemy, as
exactly,
you said.
yeah. And then some people will believe it. Now, to use a legalistic term, you know, cui bono, who benefits on this? So the region has been Congo has been at war for forever, really, since they got rid of, since they killed Patrice Lumumba, and with the help of the Western allies and so on, nothing has really gone right for them. But somebody has always profited. Somebody has always gained in all of this. So all of a sudden, relationships are changing, and that situation from which somebody has profited is about to change. And as Tom pointed out, one of the people that are going to lose in all of this are the armed groups, especially the FDLR. And we haven't mentioned the UN's been sitting quietly in all of this. And I don't know how many years ago when they promised that they were going to go after all the armed groups, and when Rwanda stepped back, nothing happened. So it was somebody is profiting from what was going on. What was going on is about to change, so therefore let's find some way of getting rid of it. And the Catholic Church has always been a conduit for all of these things anyway. So it is perfectly clear what's going on. What really we don't know is the extent to which, or at least I don't know, the extent to which these people are powerful enough to be able to derail President Tshisekedi's clear intention to find some kind of peace and stability within the region.
See, on 31st May last year, I'm sorry, Charles, when Angola, Rwanda, and the DRC, they signed a tripartite agreement, and they agreed to defeat the armed groups in those countries. But if you read read that tripartite agreement, actually the focus was the DRC and the eastern part of the DRC, because that's where you have a lot of problems, apart from the FDLR, RNC, and others who are fighting within. You have ADF in North Kivu. All these who are talking about balkanization never, ever, today, yesterday, and before, ever talked about the existence of this group and the danger it posed to their citizens. They never talked about the Congolese refugees who have been here in Rwanda for years, simply because of the insecurity created by these armed groups.
Within their country.
In their country. They even didn't bother questioning how their country can be a playground of rebel groups from other countries. So as these groups are being defeated, then they come out, here balkanization is coming.
Yes.
There you can answer the question without answering it.
It's another red herring. It's a bit like the spies in Uganda.
Yes, it's just like that. You see it, you can get even the answer from that silence they had.
It speaks volumes.
It speaks
You know,
volumes.
towards the end of last year, I listened to a very long program on VOA amongst Rwandophone Congolese.
Why?
And there was a big argument amongst them about this sect of people fighting the other segment of fellow Rwandophones. We don't know where the other guys came from, and then you ask yourself, this balkanization conversation, Why aren't they starting that amongst themselves, their own Congolese?
Yes.
Why aren't they saying that even us who live in Congo, we are not agreeing on who should take what territory? That's where the unfairness comes in. But I want to say a second point really that is related to the first segment of the show around the politics of good neighborliness. When you pick any news story today around our border with the DRC, and you take out the huge return of people who have been destabilizing us for the last decades, and you pick one case of Ebola, you know, the fighters usually concentrate in the deep in the forests. So they can even, as Bwana Tom was saying, they can stay in their own forests and pick their own taxes, put their own government officials. But when it comes to a huge problem like Ebola, that can easily affect and wipe out a huge population of our own people. But the way, because of good neighborliness, we have collaborated in putting this huge risk to test, it says a lot about the importance of good neighborliness. You can take it a notch higher and talk about Trademark East Africa and the amount of money they've put into these one-stop border posts now around the politics of good neighborliness. So I am not bothered at all, personally, with this balkanization bullcrap, because we have better stories to sell. The people across the border, a plane crashed at the end of November, for crying out loud.
Where?
They survived, no, just across Goma.
Yes.
There were a few survivors who were treated in Rwanda. Ebola, the cross-border trade, and so on and so forth, until we can give quite a number of examples.
So this calls for war, Rwanda annexing Eastern. You're not bothered.
I think it's bullcrap. I think it's bullcrap. We have a better story to sell.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we have a much better story to sell. Does that mean we should totally ignore the politics that's happening on the other side that may affect us? Definitely we shouldn't. Yeah. But I think we have a much better story to sell.
we know that
you
it's
see,
not
Dana,
true.
when someone comes out with a figure that the balkanization is almost 70%, come out with such numbers. One, for it to be possible, there has to be a visible war of secession. Is there anybody fighting for secession of those?
Maybe it's a hidden secession war that we're not aware of.
But you can't.
According to this claim.
70%, you can't hide 70%.
Absolutely.
How can you?
But Bwana Tom actually said something extremely important. I think the biggest issue lies in that President Tshisekedi did not win convincingly. And he actually beat some heavyweights in the war there. And I think therein lies the problem.
No, which is what they've been saying. But
making peace with Rwanda, improving relations with Rwanda, has made some people quite unhappy.
Yeah.
And
because
they feel
it challenges the status quo of some things, you know. I want us to very quickly go to our tweets, so please save your comments for your closing remarks, please. Okay. And our first tweet, on the topic, is from Richard, who says that illegal detention is the unjustifiable imprisonment, the unlawful deprivation of liberty of a person by way of arrest or a wrongful cause of suspicion, while kidnap is the action of holding someone captive. Just emphasizing Tom's point.
Lawyer in the house.
Yes. The next tweet, again, I think is from Richard. Clearly, either he's a lawyer or very well versed in the Queen's language.
Scholar.
So he says balkanization, American English, I think, because he spelled it with a Z, I don't know, is a geopolitical term for the process of fragmentation or division of a region or state into smaller regions or states that are often hostile or uncooperative with one
It seems
another.
like a Wikipedia quote.
I know, right? He's so Charles, I hope that has
Yes.
shed more light.
Absolutely.
And the other tweet is from Bernard, who says there is a realization and subsequent repositioning on Uganda's part that the approach has failed militarily, economically, and politically. So it's not a search for a new relationship, but a return to the drawing board and a much-needed time out. This is from
Yes.
Bernard. And yes, I think that's our tweets for today. I would like us to just give our closing remarks. I'll start with you, Vincent,
Yeah.
before I go to you, Tom and Charles.
Well,
Very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. We know that a lot of this stuff is nonsense, but actually out of nonsense can come out something very, very grave.
Like chaos.
Yeah,
Serious chaos.
absolutely.
Yes.
The balkanization thing, we know it's complete nonsense. It isn't happening, but the question is, it's being used by somebody, as I mentioned earlier. The question is, can that work? And my view, again, comes to the reaction from everybody else. But the one thing I also want to point out is one of these things, a lot of these things is actually, it's been given strength and legs to continue going because we're not really telling any stories here. We're not, the journalism in the region, the media in the region, we're not really telling all of these things. So anybody can literally come up and say there is 70% of a country that has been annexed. And we hear nothing from we who are supposed to be journalists doing all of this. Where information exists, none of this stuff, or at least a lot of this stuff, will be laughed off as soon as it comes out. But we don't hear a lot of that. Similar the same thing with Uganda.
Yeah.
So I think we talk a very great deal about, you know, telling our own stories, doing all of this. We don't seem to know exactly what that means.
Tom, less than a minute. Just
let's begin with the DRC and then end with Uganda.
No, actually, if you can just join them.
Okay.
We literally have very few seconds left.
Balkanization or secession, for me, it's dark nonsense. Relations with Uganda, I can only be optimistic if the leadership at the top decides we need good relations with Rwanda, and that can just happen sort of a stroke of a pen.
Yeah. Charles, quickly.
Business is the solution towards this thing. We have seen the business community and the Uganda Revenue Authority numbers drive a difference in thought with the way President Museveni is thinking. We can see that the business community is directly benefiting from a good neighborliness with the DRC. The solution lies in business.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I agree with you. Well, we've come to the end of the show. Vincent, great to have you on the show again.
Thank you very
Tom,
much.
I hope this is not your last time on the square. We look forward to having you again. Charlie, always a pleasure having you on the show. To our viewers, thank you for chiming in with your tweets and weighing in on this topic. Keep the conversation going using the hashtag #TheSquareRW. And to our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee, thank you for supporting The Square as always. Have a good night and see you again same time next week. Thank you.